children in this country receive public education services. About 3 million children are in charter schools. There are not enough charter school slots. So my questions are mainly focused on what about those other 46 million children? So it's mind-blowing. I hear you talk about safety, keeping students safe on school campuses, but not a word about the 390,000 students who have been affected by gun violence. I was in the classroom on the day Sandy Hook happened, and the federal government came in with almost $2 million to rebuild that community and provide programs for the surrounding communities. In your opening, I heard you mention
Tonight, a tense exchange on Capitol Hill is sending shockwaves through the national conversation about education, history, and what politicians really mean when they talk about DEI. A simple yes or no question turned into a defining moment, and it revealed far more than the answer itself. If you want clear, fact-based breakdowns of what's really happening in Washington and how it affects real families, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now.
Thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentlelady from Connecticut, Ms. Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Secretary, welcome to our committee. It's interesting, I took a lot of notes. I had prepared questions, but I think I'm going in a very different direction. We've heard other colleagues talk about the NAEP scores, and I heard you say that the president was angered and embarrassed by these, and I think we all should be. But when you disaggregate those scores, they clearly show that low-income students score significantly lower than their white and higher-income peers, and that is mostly in part to ongoing disparities in educational access and quality, which makes much of what I'm hearing today that much more relevant. You mentioned Connecticut. We both come from the state of Connecticut. Connecticut relies on property taxes to fund education, and we have one of the largest income gaps in the nation, which means by design or default, low-income students face multiple challenges, including limited access to resources and opportunities outside of schools, which is why I don't understand many of the decisions made in this budget. One of my colleagues asked about collecting data on family composition and background. The Department of Education Office of Civil Rights is mandated by law to do that. I was pleased to hear you say that states do not, the Department of Education does not control curriculum, instruction, instructional materials, the teachers that are hired, which makes your words contradictory because every argument you have is to put local control back into the states. But states already have local control, as anyone who has any knowledge or background of education would already know. The role of the Department of Education would be the civil rights enforcement of those local controls, which again, the irony of this budget zeroing out American history and civic education programs when you couldn't even answer a question about Ruby Bridges or the election of President Biden, which are as basic as it gets. So I really, really don't understand it. But you are making the argument for me because when you respond to questions from my colleagues by saying that sounds like an issue for state legislatures, that is why the Office of Civil Rights is necessary, because state legislatures made the decision that Ruby Bridges did not have the right to a free and appropriate high-quality public education. So you, Madam Secretary, are actually making the argument for the role of the department, not to dictate local curriculum instruction or instructional materials, but to make sure that those things are carried out by the department. That states follow the law, that they are doing those things. So 49 million children in this country receive public education services. About 3 million children are in charter schools. There are not enough charter school slots. So my questions are mainly focused on what about those other 46 million children. So it's mind-blowing. I hear you talk about safety, keeping students safe on school campuses, but not a word about the 390,000 students who have been affected by gun violence. I was in the classroom on the day Sandy Hook happened, and the federal government came in with almost $2 million to rebuild that community and provide programs for the surrounding communities. In your opening, I heard you mention student athletes and LGBTQ students twice, not one word. And even when my colleague asked you if you thought it was a public health crisis, you can't answer questions that affect the majority of students. So I'm not really sure. I try to I am an educator by nature. I try to be supportive of what the Department of Education does because I need for you to succeed, for my students to succeed. But when you come in and say your final mission is to eliminate the department, it says to me that the 46 million children that are not receiving services do not matter. I've ran out most of my time, but this bill defunds literacy programs, eliminates 21st Century Community Learning Center, eliminates preschool grants for children with disabilities, eliminates, reduces funding for career and technical education, like all of these things. I'm going to ask you two really quick questions. Do you think that Holocaust education in our schools is a DEI program? There's no card for that. That's just yes or no.
I can look at it whatever card I
Holocaust
choose.
education,
Thank
is
you
it a
very
DEI?
much.
You can have a press conference to say whatever you want. I just need a quick answer to
Your
this.
soliloquy
Is
been very
Holocaust,
informative.
because this is my time, is Holocaust education a DEI program?
No.
Is African American Studies a DEI
I
program?
think I answered that with one
I'm
of the
asking
other
it again.
callers. Listen, we should be
Just
able,
yes or no?
we should be able to teach
My
courses in their
point is they
entirety.
are DEI programs, both of them, because students need diversity, equity, and inclusion to understand their environments. So both Holocaust education and the teaching of African American history are important, which is why the state of Connecticut requires it in our social studies curriculum. You're talking out of both sides of your mouth. You can't support one
The
without
gentlelady's
supporting the
time has
other.
expired.
And looking at what happens in the schools and actually deferring to teachers, parents who are on curriculum committees, local boards of education, and states who actually do the hard work
The
and
gentlelady's time
listening
has
to what
expired.
they say
I appreciate
would be
the
incredibly helpful in
Passion,
this
but
role.
it's time to move on.
I yield back.
I recognize the
This is where Hayes directly challenged the narrative coming from the Department of Education's leadership. She pointed out a contradiction that often goes unchallenged. Federal officials repeatedly argue that states should have local control over curriculum, teachers, and instruction, but states already have that power. The real role of the Federal Department of Education, Hayes reminded the room, is civil rights enforcement, making sure states follow the law and do not deny children equal access to education. History shows why that role matters. Hayes invoked Ruby Bridges, a 6-year-old child who needed federal intervention just to attend an all-white school in New Orleans. State and local lawmakers, left unchecked, had already decided she did not deserve equal educational opportunity. Without federal oversight, that decision would have stood. If this analysis is helping you see today's education debates in a new light, take a moment to subscribe. These conversations matter, and understanding them changes how we see the headlines. Hayes then connected past to present. She criticized proposed budget cuts that would eliminate funding for American history and civics education programs. That concern landed especially hard after the Education Secretary struggled earlier in the hearing to answer basic questions about historical events like Ruby Bridges integration and the certification of the 2020 presidential election. For Hayes, this was not about trivia, it was about priorities. Nearly 49 million children attend public schools in the United States. Only about 3 million attend charter schools, yet policy discussions often center on choice and privatization while ignoring the other 46 million students who rely on traditional public education systems every day. She also highlighted what was missing entirely from the conversation. Despite more than 390,000 students being impacted by gun violence in schools, there was no serious discussion of school safety in that context. Hayes spoke personally about being in the classroom on the day of the Sandy Hook shooting and how federal support helped rebuild and stabilize that devastated community. To her, eliminating the Department of Education sends a message that those children and teachers no longer matter. Then came the moment that cut through the policy language and talking points. With her time nearly expired, Hayes asked a direct question, one she made clear required no script, no prepared card, and no press release. She asked whether Holocaust education in American schools should be considered a DEI program. The answer was no. Hayes followed up immediately, is African American Studies a DEI program? At that point, the tension in the room was unmistakable. Hayes did not wait for a long explanation. She explained her point herself. Both Holocaust education and African American history are essential because they help students understand diversity, equity, and inclusion in the real world. They are not political slogans, they are educational necessities. Connecticut requires both in its curriculum for a reason. Her message was blunt. You cannot defend teaching one history while dismissing the other. You cannot claim to value education while stripping resources from the very programs that help students understand the country they live in. And you cannot say you support local control while ignoring teachers, parents, curriculum committees, and local school boards who do this work every day. Before we wrap up, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss in-depth reporting like this. These moments shape policy, and policy shapes lives. What made this exchange powerful was not just the question, but what it revealed. The fight over DEI is not really about acronyms. It is about whether the full story of America belongs in the classroom. It is about whether federal oversight still has a role in protecting students who historically have been left behind. And it is about whether education policy will be driven by ideology or by evidence, history, and lived experience. Jahana Hayes did not just ask a question, she exposed a contradiction at the heart of the current education debate, and in doing so, she reminded the country why history, all of it, still matters.